Okay, so picture this. You're walking the docks, right? And you see her, that used sailboat that's calling your name. On paper, she's perfect. But what if I told you that sailboat hull, it's got secrets? What if it could talk? Well, today, we're going to learn how to listen.
It's true. Every sailboat out there, it's got a story etched into its fiberglass, its wood, its very structure. We're here to decode those silent stress signals. Make sure you're not buying into a load of headaches down the line.
So put on your detective hats, folks, because we're about to become used sailboat sleuths. We've got a stack of sources this week all about spotting those potential problems before you even think about calling in a surveyor.
Because let's be honest, a careful inspection now, that can save you a world of trouble and expense later on.
Absolutely. And we're not talking about just a quick glance over. We're going deep beneath the surface.
It's true. Every wave that boat has ridden, every gust of wind, all of those forces, they add up over time. And those little things, the ones that even seasoned sailors miss sometimes, those are the ones we're after.
You know, one source actually said the hull is like a silent storyteller. Kind of a cool way to think about it, right? Like that stubborn leak or that handrail that's seen better days. Those could be signs of bigger problems lurking below.
Right, exactly. Think of a really old house. You see some cracks in the plaster. Now, is that just the house settling, or is the foundation about to go? We're going to teach you to read those signs.
Okay, so speaking of getting up close and personal, let's talk dry dock. One source was adamant a dry dock inspection. It's non-negotiable.
I completely agree. It's like, would you buy a used car without looking under the hood? This is your chance to see what's going on below the waterline. That's where a lot of gremlins like to hide.
Okay, so we've hauled our potential dream boat out of the water, clipboard in hand. Where do we even begin? What are the key things to focus on first?
Alignment.
Yeah.
Alignment, alignment. Imagine a line from the top of the mast to the bottom of the keel, straight down. Everything should line up. The hull itself, it should be nice and symmetrical. One source had this great analogy. If it looks like the boat is doing the tango, keel off to the side. Big red flag.
Like a car that pulls to one side. Not ideal. Alignment. Check. What's next on our detective checklist?
The surface of the hull itself. And I don't mean just a casual once-over. We're talking get up close and personal, feel for bumps, scrapes, cracks. Those could be signs of past repairs or even deeper issues.
One source said lighting is everything when inspecting a hull. Depending on the time of day, you could miss a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Shadows can hide all sorts of things. If you're serious about a boat, look it over at different times of day, different lighting conditions.
Okay, so morning inspection, afternoon inspection, maybe even a late-night flashlight rendezvous. This is getting good.
It's about being thorough. You want to be sure, right?
Love it. All right, so we've checked the overall alignment, given the hull a good visual inspection. What's next? It's time for the nitty-gritty, right?
Exactly. Now we're zeroing in on those high-stress areas. The corners of the transom, that's the back part of the boat for you landlubbers out there, the engine mounts.
And the chines. Had to brush up on my boat lingo for this one.
So for those new to the boat world, think of the chines as the corners where the bottom of the hull curves up to meet the sides.
Gotcha, the corners of the underwater part of the boat. And those see a lot of stress, right?
Exactly. So we want to be extra vigilant, looking for cracks, distortions, any signs of previous repairs, especially in those zones.
It's amazing how much you can learn just by looking closely, knowing what to look for.
I know, right? Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to buying a used boat. You can avoid some costly mistakes.
Speaking of telling stories, let's move on to the keel. That mighty fin that keeps us from, well, tipping over.
That keel, it's the strong, silent type, right? Doesn't say much, but it's working hard down there, keeping you upright. Of course, that also means it's taking a beating, especially if that boat is ever, bumped into things.
Yeah, one source said it's like a ship's chin taking the brunt of any impact. So if the keel could talk, what kind of stories would it tell? What are we looking for here?
Look for signs of impact. Repairs on that front edge, the leading edge, that's always a giveaway. Or if you see a joint where the keel meets the hull and it's wider than it should be, those can be signs of a grounding or a collision.
We're like nautical detectives, right, piecing together the clues.
Absolutely. And this is where those maintenance records, those repair invoices, they become gold. Because it's not just about seeing a repair, it's about knowing what happened, how it was fixed.
Right, because a well-documented repair from a reputable yard, that's one thing. But some duct tape and hope, yeah, that's a whole other story.
Exactly. Has the boat been sailing well since that repair? Was it done right? The right materials, the right techniques? Those are things you got to find out You don't want to inherit someone else's headache.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that sometimes the real treasure is in the paperwork. Okay, so hull, check. Keel, check. What's our next target?
Let's talk about the rudder. We touched on alignment earlier, but the rudder, it deserves its own little spotlight,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to how it's built, how sound it is structurally.
Right, because a happy rudder equals a happy captain. Right. So what are we looking at specifically when we're down there staring at this rudder?
Well, most rudders are made in a few parts. You've got the outer layers, usually fiberglass, and inside that you've got a core, could be foam, could be wood, and then you've got that metal shaft, the rudder stock, that connects it all to the steering system.
So it's like a multi-layered cake, except instead of frosting, we're worried about what exactly can go wrong with a rudder.
One thing you don't want to see is delamination. That's when those layers we talked about, they start to separate. You might see a bulge or a crack on the surface.
Ah, okay. And there's a test for that, right? Something about shaking the rudder.
Exactly, the shake test. Don't worry, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. While the boat's still out of the water, grab hold of that rudder. Give it a good firm shake side to side.
I was going to say, that sounds like a good time for some sound effects, but what are we actually listening for here?
You're listening for any clunking, any rattling, anything that sounds like loose parts or worn out bearings. You want it to feel nice and tight.
Got it. No loosey-goosey rudders. So we've eyeballed it. We've given it a good shake. What else?
The rudder should turn smoothly, right? Both directions. No binding, no catching. And while you're down there, always a good idea to check for leaks around the rudder post, especially if the boat's been sitting in the water a while.
Leaky rudder definitely goes on the deal breaker list. Now, while we're on the subject of things at the back of the boat, let's talk propeller. Kind of important if you actually want to, go places.
Yeah, the propeller, it often gets overlooked, but it's the key to turning all that engine power into actual movement. And a damaged or misaligned prop, that can lead to some expensive repairs.
Speaking of alignment, that's important here too, right? It's not just about the hull and the keel being in sync.
Exactly. You want a straight line from the engine, down the shaft, all the way to the tip of the prop. If that alignment is off, even a little bit, you get vibrations, reduced performance, you could even damage the engine.
So we're picturing that straight line again, making sure everything is working in harmony.
Exactly. Now zoom in on those propeller blades themselves. Dings, dents, bent blades, anything that disrupts that smooth shape. That's going to affect performance.
One source had this really cool tip for checking if a blade is bent. You use a fixed point on the hull and a tape measure. If the distance from that fixed point to the tip of each blade is off, you might have a problem.
Simple but effective. And while we're in the prop zone, let's not forget about the outrigger.
Outrigger. See, now I'm picturing those Polynesian canoes with the big,
Not quite the same thing. On a sailboat, the outrigger is usually a vertical piece that supports the prop shaft. You'll find it just behind the rudder.
Gotcha. What should we be looking for there?
Focus on the outrigger's rubber bushing. If that bushing is worn out or damaged, especially unevenly, could be another sign of a misaligned shaft.
It's crazy how these little details, they can point to bigger problems. It's like a whole mechanical mystery, right?
It really is. Everything on a boat is connected. Understanding those relationships is key. Speaking of important relationships, let's move on to something that plays a crucial role in protecting your boat from the ravages of saltwater. Anodes.
Anodes. See, that's one of those boating terms that always sounded so, I don't know, official, like they should be wearing tiny lab coats or something. What exactly do anodes do?
Think of them as the unsung heroes of the underwater world. Anodes, often made of zinc, they're designed to corrode. They sacrifice themselves so the important metal parts of your boat, the prop, the shaft, thru-hulls don't corrode.
So they take one for the team, kind of like the designated driver of the boating world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about anodes. You actually want to see some wear and tear.
Wait, really? I thought wear and tear was always a bad thing.
Not in this case. A worn anode means it's doing its job, protecting the boat. If you see anodes that look brand new, shiny, that's actually a bad sign. Could mean they're not installed right, or there aren't enough of them, which means the boat itself could be corroding.
So we're actually looking for those valiant, slightly worse for wear anodes, a sign that the boat has been well protected.
Exactly. It's a small detail that speaks volumes about how well the boat's been maintained.
This is why we deep dive. Uncovering those hidden meanings, learning the secret language of boats. What's next on our list? Okay, we've inspected the hull, the keel, the rudder, even those hardworking anodes. But there's one area we haven't talked about yet. Those little openings in the hull, the through-hulls, for plumbing, engine cooling. They seem pretty straightforward, but I feel like there's more to them than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. Through holes, they're often out of sight, out of mind, right? Until there's a problem. And a problem with a through hull, especially one below the waterline, that can be a real nightmare.
One source said 69% of boat sinkings happen while the boat is docked. You'd think they'd be safer tied up at the marina, not out battling storms.
Right, it's those hidden leaks that'll get you. That's why checking those through holes, it's so important.
Okay, so how do we track down all those through holes and what are we looking for?
Think of it like a scavenger hunt. You got to find all those three hulls above the waterline, below the waterline. You might be surprised how many there are.
I can already picture myself, crawling around in the bilge with a flashlight.
Exactly. Once you've found them all, check the valves. Make sure they open and close easily, no corrosion, no leaks. And don't forget the hoses, those clamps that connect everything, any cracking, anywhere. Those are red flags.
Got it. So no leaky valves, no questionable hoses. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. Hull, keel, rudder, anodes, those sneaky through hulls. What else could there possibly be?
Well, there's one more thing. It's the silent enemy of fiberglass hulls. Osmosis.
Osmosis. Okay, now we're really going back to high school science class. How does that even apply to a sailboat?
It's often called hydrolysis in the boating world. Basically, water molecules, they can actually work their way into the gel coat, that outer layer of the hull, and then they react with the chemicals in the fiberglass. It creates this acidic solution.
That's not good.
Not good at all.
Yeah.
It weakens the hull over time. And you know how it shows itself? Blisters.
Blisters, like on your skin?
Well, kind of. They're bumps. They show up on the surface of the hull, usually below the waterline. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're big and ugly.
So blisters, bad. Got it.
It depends. A few small blisters, especially on an older boat, might not be a big deal. But if you see a lot of blisters, or if they're big and soft, that's when you want to call in an expert.
One source said that you often see blisters around the trailer supports or those cradle pads, something about moisture getting trapped.
That's right. Those areas tend to stay wet longer, so it's a prime spot for osmosis. Pay close attention to those spots.
It's amazing how much there is to consider when you're looking at a used boat. It really helps to know what to look for.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and it can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything in this deep dive. From hull alignment to those telltale signs of osmosis, it's been an education. If our listener takes away just one thing from this episode, what should it be?
Don't skip the inspection. I don't care how much you love that boat, how good the deal seems. Take your time, do your homework, ask questions. And if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut.
And don't be afraid to call in a professional surveyor if you need a second opinion. It's worth the peace of mind.
100%. A small investment now can save you a lot of money and regret later.
Well said. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing all this incredible knowledge with us. This has been an eye-opening deep dive into the world of used sailboat inspections.
My pleasure. Hopefully we've given our listeners the tools they need to find their perfect boat.
And for our listeners, remember, this is just the beginning. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep dreaming about those open waters. Until next time, happy sailing.